Thank you, Margaret.
Merci, Margaritis. Bonjour à vous tous. Nous retrouvons ici les mêmes deux personnes réunies. Et je passe tout de suite au français.
Mesdames et Messieurs, cher David, le discours de Theresa May à Florence a donné un élan à cette négociation.
This week,
qui en avait besoin.
we worked in a constructive spirit and we clarified certain points without, however, making any great steps forward. We still have a common goal. We're determined to reach an agreement on the withdrawal of the United Kingdom, an orderly withdrawal, and we wish to outline together the framework of our future relationship when the time comes. And that, on behalf of the Union, is what President Donald Tusk said 3 days ago, very clearly. So that is the perspective for these negotiations. We share the same objectives. We want to protect the rights of all citizens who are affected by withdrawal. We want to preserve the peace process in Northern Ireland and cooperation on the island of Ireland, and we want to honour, all 28 should honour the commitments entered into by the 28. On the Union side, we want to achieve very specifically these three objectives, and that is the condition for discussions as soon as possible on a new partnership, an ambitious and lasting partnership between the UK and the European Union. So, ladies and gentlemen, how far have we got after this fifth round? How far have we got on each of the main subjects linked to the withdrawal of the United Kingdom? First of all, citizens' rights, which are our priority. On this subject, we have two common aims. The withdrawal agreement has to have a direct effect that is essential to guarantee in a lasting way the rights of all citizens. And secondly, the interpretation of these rights has to be genuinely consistent between the Union and the United Kingdom. On these 2 points, we're continuing to work on the specific instruments and mechanisms which should give practical effect to this intention, which implies, as you know, the European Court of Justice. Now, there are still disagreements, on the other hand, about family reunification and the export of social security benefits after Brexit. These are things which we want. For example, let me illustrate the point I've just made. It's important for any European citizen residing in the United Kingdom to be able, in 10 or 15 years' time, to bring his parents where he's living, just as that will be the case for UK citizens in the Union. And similarly, a European citizen who spent 20 or so years working in the UK should be able to return to the Union, to one of the countries of the Union, with his disability pension in the same way, under the same conditions as British citizens living in the Union. And finally, I come to an important point. This is important to us, to the Member States of the Union. The UK has informed us of its intention of introducing a simplified procedure enabling the citizens to enforce their rights, and we shall study carefully the practical details of this procedure, which I really believe has to be simple for citizens.
On Ireland, ladies and gentlemen, this week we advanced on the joint principles on the continuation of the common travel area, and I welcome this. We continued our intensive work on mapping out areas of cooperation that operate on a north-south basis on the island of Ireland. There is more work to do in order to build a full picture of the challenges to north-south cooperation resulting from the UK and therefore Northern Ireland leaving the EU legal framework. This is necessary in order to identify the solutions. This week, we agreed that the 6 principles proposed by the EU in September would guide our work on protecting the Good Friday Agreement in all its dimensions. Enfin, sur le règlement financier. Dans son discours de Florence, Theresa May a affirmé que le Royaume-Uni honorerait les engagements pris.
And that is an important commitment. This week, however, the UK repeated that it was still not ready to spell out these commitments. There have therefore been no negotiations on this subject. We confined ourselves to technical discussions. Useful discussions, but technical discussions. So on this question, we've reached a state of deadlock, which is very disturbing for thousands of project promoters in Europe, and it's disturbing also for taxpayers. Ladies and gentlemen, I have set out a stock-taking of our work on the 3 main subjects. On this basis, I am not able, in the current circumstances, to propose next week to the European Council that we should start discussions on the future relationship. I repeat that that future relationship has to be robust, ambitious, and lasting, and that requires confidence between us, and that confidence will flow from clarity and the honouring of all the commitments we've entered into together as the 28. And before I conclude, let me just make one comment. At one of the last press conferences, one of you asked me when the European Union would be ready finally to make concessions. We are not asking the British to make concessions. The agreement we're working on will not be built on concessions. There's no question of making concessions on citizens' rights. There's no question of making concessions on the peace process in Ireland. And as regards the financial settlement, there's no question of making concessions on thousands of European investment projects throughout Europe. Think of all the men and women behind these projects. These are complex and difficult negotiations. We have shared objectives, as I recalled, and we have shared obligations. We also have shared duties, and we shall succeed only with shared solutions. That is our responsibility. To conclude, I've been saying this ever since the Florence speech. There is a new momentum, and I remain convinced today that with political will, decisive progress is within our grasp in the next 2 months. And along with David Davis, we've agreed on various meetings between now and the end of the year. My responsibility as a negotiator on behalf of the Commission of the European Union, and with the confidence of President Juncker, my responsibility is to look for ways of making this progress, complying strictly with the conditions laid down by the European Council on the 29th of April, and it did so unanimously. That is my mandate. and I shall abide scrupulously by that mandate. And I shall work in close conjunction with the European Parliament, which adopted a resolution by a huge majority on 2 occasions. So that's what I intend to say next week in the European Council. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Michel. Ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Michel. Ladies and gentlemen. At the last round of talks, we spoke of a new dynamic, and Michel has referred to that. And our negotiating teams have continued to work constructively together in a professional and determined manner this week. And they've developed, as Michel says, an increased sense of shared political objectives. Now, while there is still work to be done, much work to be done, we've come a long way, and it's important to recognise the significant progress we've made since June. Let me, as Michel did, take the issues in turn. On citizens' rights, we've made further progress to give British citizens in the EU and EU27 citizens in the UK the greatest possible legal certainty about the future. Our legal orders will, in the future, be distinct and different. So this week we explored ways of making sure the rights we agree now will be enforced in a fair and equivalent way, and in a way that gives citizens confidence that their rights will be upheld. We've also explored ways in which we could fulfil the Prime Minister's commitment to implement the Withdrawal Treaty fully into UK law, which would give confidence to EU citizens living in the UK they'd be able to enforce their rights, as are set out in the agreement, in UK courts. And we've discussed ways of ensuring a consistent interpretation of the concepts of EU law that will underpin much of our agreement. And while we have not yet arrived at a single model that achieves this, we've explored creative solutions and are confident we'll reach an agreement soon. We've also focused this week on the other remaining issues on which we've not yet arrived at a solution, and Michel referred to a few of them. But these are the right to bring in future family members, to export a range of benefits, to continue to enjoy the recognition of professional qualifications, to vote in local elections, to move within the 27 as a UK citizen, and to leave for a prolonged period and yet continue to enjoy a right to remain, a permanent right of residence on return. These issues are not easy, but we've approached them with a shared spirit of trying to find solutions, and both teams will now reflect further on that. We're taking a pragmatic approach, as demonstrated by our offer of a guaranteed right of return for settled citizens in the UK in return for onward movement rights to UK citizens currently living in the EU. We look forward to hearing the European Union's response to this. I want to highlight one particular productive area of our talks this week. And I recognise there has been some anxiety about EU citizens' rights to settled status in the United Kingdom. But today I can confirm that we want to reassure those European citizens living in the UK that their rights and status will be enshrined in UK law by the withdrawal agreement. And yes, there will be a registration process, but the administration process will be completely new. It will be streamlined, it will be low cost, and in addition to that, any EU citizen in the UK already in possession of a permanent residence card will be able to exchange it simply for settled status in a simple way. They'll not have to go through the full application process again. And to reassure those affected, I can confirm the tests associated with this process will be agreed and set out in our withdrawal agreement. We'll also make sure that citizens' rights of review of and redress for any errors will be quick, accessible and fair. I'll set out a position on ensuring citizens' rights, future rights, in a statement for the Commission, which they can share, a written statement, which they can share with the European Union 27. And as a result of our productive discussions, the Commission is also able to offer similar guarantees in return for those British citizens in the European Union. This is a very welcome clarification. It's built real confidence that the rights of EU citizens in the UK and British citizens in the European Union will continue to be accessible in the most straightforward way possible. In summary, I think that this week of talks has brought us even closer to a deal that gives citizens rights to the legal certainty that they deserve. I welcome the advances too that we've made on the discussions on Northern Ireland and Ireland. This week we developed the joint principles on the continuation of the common travel area. Our teams have also mapped out areas of cooperation that operate on a north-south basis. As Michel said, there's more work to do here in order to build a fuller picture of how we overcome the challenges to north-south cooperation once the UK has left the European Union. But I'm pleased to say we have made further progress here. We've also agreed, based on critical guiding principles which both sides recognise, we will start working on a common understanding on possible commitments and undertakings necessary to effectively protect the Good Friday Belfast Agreement in all its dimensions. I said last time we were determined to tackle the unique circumstances of Northern Ireland by focusing creatively on specific solutions, and we've begun to do so. As the Prime Minister said in a statement to Parliament this week, we owe it to the people of Northern Ireland, and indeed to everyone on the island of Ireland, to get this right. On the financial settlement, we've continued in the spirit fostered by the Prime Minister's significant statements in her Florence speech. In line with the process agreed at our last round of talks, we have undertaken a rigorous examination of the technical detail where we need to reach a shared view. This is not a process of agreeing specific commitments. We have been clear this can only come later. But it is an important step so that when the time comes, we'll be able to reach a political agreement quickly and simply. On separation issues, we've continued to work through detail on a range of issues. And while we've made good progress, particularly in those areas relating purely to our withdrawal, we believe these issues are dependent on discussions on our future relationship. And as I've said before, we're ready and well prepared to start those discussions. So, our aim is to provide as much certainty as possible to business, citizens and the European Union. And on this, we're making real and tangible progress. But I make no secret of the fact that to provide certainty, we must talk about the future. The Prime Minister's speech set out the scale of our ambition for our deep and special partnership in the European Union, and also laid out the case for a simple, clear and time-limited period of implementation on current terms. As I said when I stood here last time, I hope the leaders of 27 will provide Michel with the means to explore ways forward with us on that, and to build on the spirit of cooperation we now have. I've always been clear that we would enter those negotiations in a constructive and responsible way. The work of our teams and the substantial progress that we have made over recent months proves we're doing just that. As we look to the October European Council next week, I hope the Member States will recognise the progress we've made and take a step forward in the spirit of the Prime Minister's Florence speech. Doing so will allow us to best achieve our joint objectives by turning the ideas we've explored into concrete shared proposals. That's where we'll move forward towards a deal that works for both the United Kingdom and the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you both. I will start with Alex Barker, here on the right.
Alex Barker from the Financial Times. Mr. Davis, you said before that the big prize is the future relationship, that's the only certainty it can bring. But the brinksmanship is clearly reaching quite a high level now. This is quite a high wire act, and the risks of no deal are rising. What are you holding out for? What are you gaining by holding out at this stage? And given the risks are rising, should you be spending money now on a no-deal scenario, or is the Chancellor not being gloomy enough on the prospects of no deal? And Mr. Barnier, you've hinted already that discussing the transition will be a way to find a landing zone potentially on the divorce issues as well. Shouldn't you be doing that at an early stage in exploring those issues to bring these talks, give these talks a bit more momentum than they have at the moment? Why is that impossible at this point?
Well, shall I start, Michel? What are we aiming for? Well, that's really what I've been outlining so far. But in summary, a good, mutually beneficial deal overall. It's as simple as that. As for the preparation for a new deal, for no deal, well, clearly this negotiating process is aimed at getting a good deal for both sides. And that's the prize we're aiming for. But if that's not possible, a government has to be ready for the alternatives. So as the Prime Minister said yesterday, the UK is planning for all outcomes. It's not what we seek. We want to see a good deal, but we're planning for everything. It's the duty of a responsible government to plan for all scenarios, however improbable, and that's what we're doing. And when money needs to be spent, it will be spent when it needs to be spent. And we've allocated already £250 million to departments to fund the work they need to do to prepare for all those scenarios. And if we need to allocate more at that time, it will be done in the appropriate way. Michel.
If I may, on the first point, the risk of the no deal. a no deal will be a very bad deal. Huh? And to be clear, on our side, we will be ready to face any eventualities and all the eventualities. Sur votre question, j'ai rappelé le contenu du mandat que j'ai reçu.
Recalled the mandate that I've received from the 27 member states, a unanimous mandate. My job is to respect that mandate and take due account of the resolutions adopted by the European Parliament. And I have a responsibility as negotiator to find a way forward. Let me be absolutely clear and frank with you. I said earlier, well, all these subjects are linked together for the member states. The orderly withdrawal, the need to settle the accounts, and we are in a position of deadlock at the moment. But I'm sure, as I said, that with the necessary will and on the basis of the commitments entered into by Theresa May in Florence, we can find a way out of this deadlock.
I had Bruno there, Waterfield.
Bruno Waterfield, Times of London. First for Mr. Davis. Germany and other countries want the promise to honour commitments on budget liabilities, amongst other things, to be put on paper, written guarantees, before any transition talk. Have you done that? And given that now the technicians are looking at the odd billion here and there, when will you do that? And if not, why not? Mr. Barnier, Mr. Davis has just said that he's looking forward to hearing your response to a guaranteed right of return for European nationals, subject to addressing the question of onward free movement for UK nationals. He hasn't heard that response yet. Have you accepted the offer on that particular part of the dossier, or is it that your mandate is too restrictive for you to be able to do that? And will you again be asking co-repair tomorrow for a looser mandate enabling you to do a scoping exercise, which I believe is a technical term, on transition arrangements before you meet the sufficient progress threshold?
I can answer very briefly. We're not doing the negotiation here, Bruno, on this podium, so I won't be going through that aspect. And I'm not aware, frankly, of any German government proposals to it. But well, I've already explained in some detail, what I've said already, what we're doing.
Sur le point de la liberté de circulation.
On the question of free movement throughout the European Union, throughout the internal market for British citizens after Brexit, you imply that my mandate is too restrictive. No, it's precise. It's precise as regards sequencing in particular. To make a success of the negotiations, we've got to do things in the right order. That is a condition of success. If we mix everything up, there are risks. I've said this several times, and I repeat it today. So, to succeed, I want things to be taken in the right order. In this first part of the negotiations, we're dealing with subjects which have to do with citizens. We're dealing with rights acquired up to the date of Brexit, and we're dealing with life choices made by citizens up to the day of Brexit. So European citizens and UK citizens. I come to your question. Well, it remains on the table. Let me be very clear about that. It has to do with life choices which will be made by citizens after Brexit. So that question, I repeat, remains on the table. I'm willing to discuss it at the appropriate time. That time has not yet come. It's not part of the first stage of the negotiations.
No, Markstone. Go on the right.
Where's the microphone?
There.
Hello? Yes. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Mark Stone from Sky News. To Mr Davis first, please. If we go back to first principles, you have consistently talked up progress through these past 5 weeks. You don't appear to have got much progress at all. The public were led to believe that this would be a relatively easy negotiation. We were told that the European Union would behave differently, that they'd be desperate to do trade deals. It doesn't appear to be the case at all. We're seeing businesses now, both in the UK and on the continent, beginning to enact their contingency plans. Citizens right across the continent continue to have no idea what their future will be. It looks very much as though Britain is losing this one. And for Mr Barnier, you talk about the fact that no one needs to make concessions, sir. That doesn't really sound like much of a negotiation. One key concession, surely, on your part, would be to loosen up the mandate to allow things to flow a little bit more smoothly. Thank you.
Can I start? Well, first thing, I don't really recognise some of the circumstances you describe, but there we are. The position we're in now is defined by the Council's criterion of sufficient progress. The next step in this process is the European Council in October, and clearly we would like them to give Michel the means to broaden the negotiation. It's up to them whether they do it. I think it's in the interest of Europe and the United Kingdom that they do. Michel.
D'abord,
you mentioned the European Union's position on a free trade agreement. I think there is a real will on the European Union side to build a strong and lasting relationship of cooperation with the UK, and this in many areas. The present government of the United Kingdom has chosen to implement the exit of the UK from the European Union, but also the exit from the single market and the customs union. So when the time comes, we will talk about a free trade agreement, and we will be ready to do that, whilst respecting the full integrity of the single market and the European Union's decision-making autonomy there. We will do that as soon as possible, but as soon as possible means once we've overcome the first stage, which has got nothing to do with the future relationship. So sorting out the conditions for an orderly withdrawal. My mandate looks ahead to these different stages. So slowly but surely, over the next few weeks, I will explore the way forward. If there is the necessary will, I will explore ways of getting out of this deadlock we find ourselves in on the financial issues, with a view to making sufficient progress by the next European Council. Unfortunately, we're not at that stage now.
Chris Morris.
Chris Morris, BBC News. You've both chosen to accentuate the positive where you can, but it's obvious that the hope and expectation was that progress would have moved a lot further by now, especially given the 2-year Article 50 timetable. Businesses are worried, citizens are worried. You both pride yourselves on being good negotiators. What are you doing that's so badly wrong?
You want to start with this one?
I'm willing to repeat for the 4th time what I've been saying since the beginning of this conference. We have to be able to note together that there is sufficient progress on citizens' rights. They are a priority. We've made a lot of progress, but we haven't yet made the necessary progress. And I repeat, there's no question of making concessions on either side. We need to find legal and statutory arrangements. We have different legal orders. We need to guarantee these rights. I don't like the word concessions as as regards citizens' rights or as regards the recipients of community programmes, including in the UK, and the same applies to financing. I think we need to play things down a bit. We have to settle the accounts. As I said to the Parliament on Tuesday, we have to draw conclusions from the important decision taken in a sovereign manner by the UK to withdraw from the Union. There are consequences, including this consequence. So we need to break the deadlock, and then we can make progress fairly swiftly on other matters.
Right. There are points of tension in all negotiations, just like any other. There's been more than one so far, so that's no surprise. When you're going through those points of tension in negotiation, there are a couple of things to bear in mind. One is what's mutually beneficial to both sides, and keep an eye on that and forget some of the ripples along the way. And secondly, where the end result is going to land, not the individual stages. But in terms of where we're, the most important thing, obviously, is the October, which is why I've said I hope they give Michel the means to progress what we're doing.
Catherine, middle there.
Catherine Pure, EU reporter. Secretary of State, you've talked a lot about the future relationship, but you've thrown on the table that you, at the outset, that you don't want to be part of the single market or in the. I mean, single market. So, how are you going to overcome that, given what we know about what you expect from the future relationship? And also, people have asked about the benefits. You've said that you don't see people, companies, being concerned about the situation. Well, I would ask you, Theresa May published an industrial strategy, or the beginnings of an industrial strategy for the UK. Can you name one company in one sector identified in that strategy that sees Brexit as anything other than a huge challenge? Thank you.
Let me deal with first off with the Northern Irish, the Good Friday Agreement, Irish and Northern Irish Agreement. Of course, it's based on some issues that were current at the time it was written, namely the single market and customs union membership. And that's one of the reasons we can't resolve all the issues yet, because until we know exactly what the final customs and market access arrangements are. But when we do, we are convinced that we can get a solution which retains and underpins the Good Friday / Belfast Agreement. That is common to both sides in this negotiation. Both of us want to protect the peace agreement in Northern Ireland, and we will move heaven and earth to do so, and I think it's eminently possible. In broader terms, about the long-term industrial strategy and the long-term approach to the United Kingdom, clearly one of the things it will do is it will seek to make the most of its global trading arrangements. The European Union itself has said that 90% of world growth will come from outside the Union, and that is what we will be aiming ourselves at, and there will be many companies going from that. Thank you.
Je ne vais pas commenter davantage.
I don't really want to add to what I said earlier about Ireland. This is a very important point for us, for me. It's clear that the situation in Ireland is a unique situation, as the UK has recognised. So once we have made a common reading of the conditions, the elements and the consequences of the Good Friday Agreement and the Common Travel Area, we then, on that basis, have to find specific solutions for this specific situation. These solutions wouldn't constitute a precedent for other situations.
Conference for today. Thank you all for your massive presence. Midday briefing starts immediately. Thank you.